The wedding hall sparkled with thousands of tiny lights, their reflections dancing on the polished marble floor. The scent of fresh roses and the faint aroma of champagne filled the air. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled and laughed, the chatter blending into a festive symphony. Every detail screamed perfection, except for one glaring omission. Clara stood at the grand entrance, her black gown clinging to her slender frame, heels clicking softly against the marble. Her heart thudded painfully. She had spent weeks preparing for this day, carefully selecting her outfit, rehearsing her lines of congratulations, and arranging her hair to perfection. She had expected warmth, smiles, recognition. She had expected to belong. But belonging wasn't on the guest list. "She's not allowed in." The words struck her like a bullet. Clara turned sharply to see her friend's mother, a woman whose elegance masked a sharp, unforgiving cruelty, standing with arms crossed. Her eyes were cold, almost predatory. I just came to see the ceremony." Clara stammered, voice tight with disbelief. "I didn't." "You didn't what?" the woman snapped, cutting her off. "You didn't belong here. This is a private affair. You've overstayed your welcome." The security guard stepped forward, hand outstretched, guiding Clara toward the exit. "You'll have to leave," he said, voice detached, a silent enforcer of a cruel hierarchy. The whispers began instantly. A ripple of confusion, curiosity, and judgment spread through the guests. Clara's cheeks burned with humiliation as she realized that all eyes were on her. Each whisper stabbed like a dagger, each glance a reminder that she was unwanted, uninvited, erased from an event that should have welcomed her. And yet, as she stepped out into the cool night, rain beginning to fall lightly on her shoulders, a strange sensation welled inside her. It wasn't just hurt, it was something darker, something that promised retribution. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel, for your support means a lot to me. Now back to my story. They had tried to humiliate her. They had failed. Because Clara Romano was not who they thought she was. And soon, they would learn that some doors, once closed in arrogance, lead only to their own destruction. Clara drove through the rain-slicked streets, her heels resting on the passenger side floorboard, the sound of raindrops tapping the windshield like a relentless drum. Her heart was no longer filled with humiliation. It had shifted to something colder, sharper. They thought they had seen her, understood her. They were wrong. She had always been Clara Romano, the quiet, seemingly ordinary girl from a modest family. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was the life she had built behind closed doors. She was married to Matteo Romano, a man whose name commanded fear across Europe, a mafia king whose influence stretched through governments, businesses, and underworld networks alike. As she drove past the neon-lit shops and late-night cafes, a smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. Tonight, they had shown the world their arrogance. They had tried to humiliate her, and in doing so, they had underestimated the weight of the world she carried quietly at her side. Her phone buzzed, a subtle reminder of the network always watching, always ready. Every slight against her could be traced, every insult catalogued. Power, she realized, wasn't loud. It was invisible. It was patient. And now, it was turning toward those who had laughed at her. The wedding had been a test, a stage on which her so-called friends displayed their ignorance. But tests were only useful if someone passed them. Clara had failed theirs on purpose, by walking away, by leaving them believing they had won. Because real power didn't announce itself with words or gestures. It waited, and it struck when least expected. The apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls as Clara poured herself a glass of red wine. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour, drumming against the window like a warning. Her phone rang, cutting through the quiet. She glanced at the screen. "Matteo." "Clara," his voice came through, calm but edged with that unmistakable authority. "They tried to shame you." "They kicked me out," she replied, voice tight with lingering anger. "In front of everyone, they humiliated me. My own friends, my own family. They've shown their ignorance." Matteo said, his tone cold, controlled. "And ignorance is expensive." Clara's lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had waited for this moment, not in anger, but in calculation. The world thought she was powerless, that she would bend, break, and beg. But they had forgotten one crucial truth. Clara Romano was married into a family that demanded respect, loyalty, and fear in equal measure. Within hours, subtle chaos began. Anonymous messages, late-night phone calls, a few unexpected visitors, each a carefully placed reminder that every action had consequences. Clara had never raised a hand herself. She didn't need to. Influence traveled in whispers, in shadows, in reputations carefully cultivated. She sat back, swirling the wine in her glass, savoring the calm before the storm. The people who had laughed at her, mocked her, and dismissed her presence at the wedding would soon understand what she already knew. Humiliation was not harmless, and arrogance invited reckoning. By the time the city slept, the first tremors had reached the wedding guests. Rumors spread, tension grew, and fear seeped into their conversations like poison. Clara Romano didn't need to chase them. Power always found its way, and the world, she thought, would soon remember her name. Because tonight, the girl they had kicked out of a wedding had already begun to take everything they had ever taken from her, and more. The first signs of change came quietly, almost imperceptibly, like shadows creeping across a wall. Clara didn't need to confront anyone directly. That was the beauty of the power she wielded. Every whisper, every glance, every phone call she orchestrated moved like invisible fingers, tightening a web around those who had humiliated her. The bride's mother awoke one morning to find a plain brown envelope slipped under her door. She hesitated, heart thudding, before opening it. Inside were photographs, Clara standing beside Matteo at a private event, dressed in black silk, flanked by men whose presence alone could make even the boldest tremble. Each photograph carried an unmistakable message. Clara's reach was far, her influence deadly, and her husband's power absolute. A note accompanied the photos, written in clear, deliberate script. "Next time, think before you humiliate." By midday, whispers had begun to travel through the wedding guests' circle. Those who had laughed at Clara now shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Eyes darting, conversations stuttering. Fear had taken root. Clara sat in her apartment, watching the city lights blur through the rain-streaked window. A small smile played at her lips. She hadn't struck with fury or malice. She had merely reminded them of the world they had chosen to ignore, the world her presence commanded. The bride's mother paced, pale and trembling. Every second she spent imagining the consequences magnified her dread. She could not undo what she had done. She could not reclaim the humiliation she had inflicted. Clara knew this was only the beginning. The dominoes had been set in motion. Every insult, every snicker, every moment of public dismissal would return to them, multiplied. And when the full weight of realization fell on their shoulders, there would be no one to protect them, no ally, no escape. Because Clara Romano had begun to play her hand, and once the game started, there was no turning back. By the time the evening arrived, the wedding hall that had once buzzed with laughter and arrogance now hummed with tension. Clara's name had become a silent specter, spoken in whispers behind closed doors, across tabletops, and in hurried phone calls. Fear, subtle but unmistakable, had settled like a shadow over the once confident guests. "They say she's married to Matteo Romano," one woman murmured, glancing nervously around. "The Romano family, they don't forgive." "They wouldn't dare," a man added, voice low, but the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Clara's presence was no longer necessary. Her reputation, carefully cultivated and protected by a network of influence, had already begun to command obedience. The same people who had laughed at her black gown, who had mocked her smile, and whispered cruelly about her place at the wedding, were now consumed by paranoia. Every laugh felt dangerous, every word a potential trigger. Inside the mansion, the bride's mother paced, wringing her hands. She replayed the moment she had sent Clara away, watched the security guard escort her to the exit, and now each memory felt like a chain tightening around her own neck. Every decision she had made, every insult she had allowed, now threatened consequences she could not escape. Clara, from the safety of her apartment, observed it all unfolding. The fear was delicious, but controlled. She was careful not to appear. Not yet. Let the whispers grow. Let the paranoia build. The dominoes were falling exactly where she wanted them. By nightfall, her phone buzzed again. Another subtle message, another reminder. She didn't need to act directly. Her enemies were already unraveling. Humiliation had become dread. Laughter had turned to fear. And in the quiet of the evening, Clara allowed herself the smallest of smiles. They had tried to erase her. They had tried to humiliate her. And now, without a single word from her, they had begun to regret it. The storm was only getting started. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through the quiet hum of Clara's apartment. She glanced at the clock, almost midnight. Visitors at this hour were rare, and rarely good news. She opened the door to find a man in a sharp gray suit, his face pale and tense, holding a leather briefcase. I'm here on behalf of your friend's family," he stammered, his eyes darting nervously. They need to speak with you." Clara raised an eyebrow, leaning against the doorframe, her black gown catching the dim light. Speak with me, at this hour. Her voice was calm, almost bored. Do they bring apologies at midnight now? The man swallowed hard. They are desperate. They've realized the mistake they made. Clara stepped aside, allowing him to enter. She poured herself a cup of tea, watching him pace nervously. He was clearly out of his depth. And she reveled in it. Power wasn't loud. It didn't need guns or threats. It moved silently, invisibly, like a predator circling its prey. They have realized nothing, she said softly, setting down her cup. They have merely glimpsed the consequences of underestimating someone they thought was weak. The lawyer's face paled. You're untouchable, even they. Clara cut him off with a subtle gesture. Fear is enough. They will learn what it means to disrespect me without my hand ever touching them. He nodded, trembling slightly, then gathered his papers and left, muttering that he would relay the message. Clara closed the door behind him and leaned against it, a small smile playing at her lips. The seed of dread had been planted. The people who had kicked her out, humiliated her, mocked her, none of them would sleep easily again. Outside, the city lights reflected in the puddles on the street. Inside, Clara's calm demeanor hid a storm of calculated revenge. Patient and precise, she didn't need to rush. They had already begun to fear her. And soon, the consequences of their arrogance would fall like lightning. Late at night, the streets outside the bride's family mansion were empty, but inside, panic had already begun to take root. Clara watched from a distance, hidden in the shadows, her black coat blending seamlessly with the darkness. She didn't need to move forward. Her presence alone, known to a select few, was enough to unsettle them. A sleek black car pulled up silently. From it stepped two men, silent, precise, and unmistakably professional. They carried no weapons openly, but the air around them screamed authority, a warning that words could not deliver. They delivered a simple message. Clara Romano's wrath was not idle, her influence unstoppable. Inside the mansion, chaos was subtle but pervasive. The bride's mother paced frantically, wringing her hands, whispering apologies no one could hear. The guests, who had once laughed at Clara's black gown, now whispered about threats, power, and consequences. Every glance over a shoulder, every nervous shuffle, betrayed their growing terror. Clara remained in the shadows, calm and composed. She didn't need to enter. She didn't need to speak. The fear had already begun to do her bidding. The woman who had mocked her, the friends who had dismissed her, they were unraveling. And every heartbeat of panic, every tremor in their voices, only confirmed what Clara had known all along. Humiliation was never harmless, and arrogance had a price. Her phone buzzed, a soft chime that matched the rhythm of the storm outside. Mateo's message was brief but chilling. They felt the first tremors. Watch how quickly panic spreads. Clara allowed herself the faintest of smiles. She didn't need revenge to be swift or loud. It would be methodical, precise, and devastating. The mansion's lights flickered through the night, a silent reminder that even in the world of appearances, fear could travel faster than any rumor. And tonight, fear had claimed its first victims. Clara Romano had begun her reckoning, and nothing, not status, not wealth, not family, could protect them from what was coming next. The phone rang, shrill and urgent, breaking the uneasy silence in Clara's apartment. She picked it up casually, expecting another nervous messenger or an update from Mateo. Instead, it was the bride herself, voice trembling and desperate. Clara, I didn't know. I swear we didn't mean. Clara raised an eyebrow, leaning back in her chair. The storm outside rattled against the window pane, echoing the tension in the room. Didn't mean what? She asked, her voice calm but laced with an edge that could cut steel. We didn't know about your husband, your connections, about who you are. The bride stammered. We never wanted to humiliate you. Clara smiled faintly, almost pityingly. It wasn't about me, she said softly. It was about respect, and respect is earned. You've had your lesson, haven't you? A pause. Clara could hear the bride swallowing hard on the other end, the sound heavy with dread. Yes. Yes, I understand. Please, can we fix this? Clara's eyes narrowed, voice now sharp and deliberate. Fix this. There is no fixing the ignorance you displayed. The moment you laughed, mocked, and dismissed me, you set a chain of events into motion. The fear you feel now, it is the first consequence. The rest is not mine to deliver. The bride fell silent. For the first time, she felt the full weight of what she had unleashed by underestimating Clara Romano. Every whisper, every nervous glance from her friends, every subtle tremor in the family, it was all evidence of the reckoning. Clara hung up slowly, savoring the moment. The confession had come, but it wasn't relief, it was realization. They had finally understood the scale of what they had provoked. Outside, the city was drenched in rain, lights glinting off puddles like shattered glass. Inside, Clara sat alone, serene, calculating the next moves. She didn't need to act immediately. The fear was already working, spreading, suffocating. The wedding hall was alive with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses. But tonight, Clara's presence would shift the air itself. She arrived unannounced, her heels clicking deliberately against the polished marble. Black silk hugged her form, hair perfectly in place, eyes scanning the room with a quiet, commanding intensity. Every head turned as she entered. Conversations faltered, smiles froze. The very people who had whispered cruelly, who had mocked her black gown, who had kicked her out without a second thought, every one of them felt the weight of her gaze. Her husband, Matteo Romano, was there as well, his presence subtle but undeniable. No one dared question it, no one dared approach. He didn't need to act, his name alone spoke volumes. The power of the Romano family echoing through every nervous glance. Clara walked to the center of the room. Calm and composed, she didn't shout. She didn't demand attention. She simply existed in a way that made it impossible to ignore her. The whispers began immediately, soft at first, then building into a chorus of fear and awe. The bride's mother's eyes widened. The family's earlier arrogance had crumbled entirely. The humiliation they had inflicted now reflected back on them, magnified by the realization that Clara had been untouchable all along. Clara's lips curved into a faint, controlled smile. She didn't need to speak. Her presence, her confidence, and the subtle aura of danger surrounding her were enough. The people who had once thought they could erase her now bowed to the truth. Clara Romano was not merely a guest. She was a storm, patient, precise, and unstoppable. As she left the hall later that night, the murmurs followed her, and the sense of dread lingered. She had reclaimed her place, reasserted her power, and ensured the memory of her humiliation would haunt those who dared to disrespect her. The lesson was simple, yet unforgettable. Never underestimate the quiet one. Never mock the invisible storm. And never, ever forget that some reputations are built to last forever. Clara Romano had returned, and the world had learned to fear her. The wedding had ended hours ago, but the echoes of Clara's presence lingered. The hall, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now held a subtle tension, a residue of the storm she had unleashed. Those who had mocked her, dismissed her, and humiliated her could not shake the fear that had settled deep in their bones. Clara stood on the quiet street outside, rain-soaked and flawless, Matteo at her side. She didn't need to look back. The trembling faces inside the hall were enough. The power she wielded was undeniable. Silent yet overwhelming, it wasn't vengeance she sought. It was recognition. The world had attempted to erase her, to belittle her, and she had shown them precisely what happens when a storm is ignored. Inside, the bride's mother sat alone, replaying every moment of her cruelty, every harsh word and dismissive glance. She had thought that humiliating Clara would assert her control. Instead, it had shown her own weakness, magnified by the realization that Clara had never been powerless. Clara didn't gloat, she didn't need to. The fear and respect she had instilled spoke louder than any words. Every slight, every whisper of arrogance, had returned to those who had sown it, leaving them in quiet, unshakable dread. As she walked away, the city lights glinting off wet pavement, Clara allowed herself a small smile. This was more than triumph, it was justice. The quiet girl they had kicked out of a wedding had become a presence that could not be ignored. Matteo's hand brushed hers, a subtle affirmation of their bond and their combined influence. Together, they were untouchable. Together, they commanded a world that had underestimated them at its peril. Clara Romano had survived humiliation, orchestrated retribution, and claimed her place in a world that had tried to forget her. And as the rain continued to fall softly around her, she knew one truth above all. Some storms cannot be stopped. They must be endured, or they will change everything. The woman they had tried to erase had returned stronger, untouchable, and victorious. The Mafia wife was no longer a secret. She was a warning. Weeks had passed since the storm Clara Romano had unleashed. The wedding hall, once a symbol of arrogance and judgment, had faded into memory, but the echoes of her presence lingered like a shadow no one could shake. The family who had humiliated her no longer laughed freely. Whispers followed them wherever they went, a reminder that power was never to be underestimated. Clara sat in her penthouse, overlooking the city lights glimmering in the distance. Rain tapped gently against the windows, a soothing rhythm that contrasted the chaos she had left behind. Matteo poured them both glasses of red wine. Their presence together, a quiet statement of dominance and unity. You handled it well, Matteo said. His voice calm, almost approving. They won't forget this. Clara smiled, tracing the rim of her glass. They never learn until it's too late. She replied, and by then it's irreversible. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet storm that had shifted the balance of power. But Clara didn't need recognition from the world. She had her own reckoning, her own victory, humiliation, mockery, and fear had taught the lessons her enemies deserved. And she had done it without losing herself, without compromising the life she had fought so hard to build. Her phone buzzed briefly, another subtle message from Matteo's network, confirming that every ripple of influence had landed exactly where it should. Clara set it aside. She had learned long ago that power worked best when it was invisible, when it moved like a shadow, silent but undeniable. For Clara Romano, the wedding had been more than an insult. It had been a warning to anyone who underestimated her. And now, looking back, she understood the full truth. The quiet ones, the dismissed, the overlooked, they are the ones who leave the deepest mark. She lifted her glass to the night, to the storm she had become, and to the life she had claimed, unyielding, untouchable, unstoppable. The Mafia wife was no longer a secret. She was a legend,